In this video, we're going to explore the dynamic range of the D700 and the D70. Now the D700 is obviously going to be better because it's full frame and 4 years newer and quite a bit more expensive, okay? The D70 though is still a very good camera. According to Photons to Photos, the D700 has a dynamic range of, looks like about 9.1. And the D70 has a dynamic range of about 7.4. Now that's quite a bit more dynamic range in the D700, but does that matter in real world shooting? We're gonna find out. Dynamic range, what exactly is that? Dynamic range is the camera's ability to capture detail in both bright highlights and the dark shadows in one photograph. Okay, can you get all the bright brights and the dark darks in one photograph? Sunsets are a perfect example of a high dynamic range photograph. In this photograph, here's the JPEG out of camera. And if you open the raw photograph in Camera Raw, you can see the red is the clipping in the highlight area. The blue is the clipping in the shadow area. But if you look at the original JPEG, it looks just fine. You can't really tell that it's being clipped. You know, years ago, HDR, high dynamic range photography was a thing. HDR, what they were doing was taking multiple shots of the same image, overexposed, regular exposed, and underexposed. They take the dark areas from the overexposed and the bright areas from the underexposed, put it together in Photoshop, and you had a kind of weird looking photograph. HDR photography kind of went by the wayside. You can see all the detail in the shadow, but it just looked kind of weird. Shadows need to be dark, highlight areas need to be bright. It's just how photography is. Now, a studio portrait would normally be a low dynamic range photo because the photographer has full control of the lighting, okay? So here's a sample of a portrait photo, and you can see there's no blown out highlights, there's no bright areas, there's no dark shadowy areas. So unless you want like a low key or a high key image, you don't want an overexposed or underexposed photograph. A cloudy day would also be a lower dynamic range image, okay? So I went out and took a bunch of photos. Here we have a sample of airplane. We've got bright sky. We've got the sun hitting these bright white letters, and we have shadow. Now, went into Adobe Photoshop, Camera Raw. This is the D70. So a little bit of a comparison that I did. All right, first I switched it to black and white so you're not confused by colors. Then I turned the black all the way down, the whites all the way up so you can see where the clipping is gonna occur, okay? Now we go back, we put it back to normal, and you see there's no clipping. There's no clipping in this image, okay? Just to see what it looks like if you can overexpose, bring the shadows up, bring the whites down. The image looks horrible, but there it is. You can see that the blacks, the shadows come out. The highlights just kind of just look like muddy and horrible. You would never do this, but you could see that the shadows aren't clipped out and the bright areas are not clipped out. Okay, now let's look at the same thing for the D700. First thing I did was I got rid of the color, turn the blacks down, turn the whites all the way up. These are the areas that should be clipped. They're not clipped. Looking back at the normal image, okay, they're not clipped. There's no clipping in these bright sunny day photographs, okay? Now a bright sunny day photograph is a higher dynamic range image, okay? And the D70 and the D700 do a fine job in these photographs, okay? I've got a few more images, okay? I went into an antique store and photographed some antiques in windows. So what you're gonna get is you're gonna get the bright sunny day outside. The walls on the inside are very dark because it's an old brick building. Let's take a look at these images. Okay, the sun is coming in this window and it does have some clipping. Here's the original JPEG out of camera. The image looks fine. You don't see any noticeable clipping in the photo that you'd be looking at. Here is the raw, unedited raw version out of camera. And you'll notice the red areas is the highlight clipping. The dark blue is the shadow clipping. Okay, so you got clipping in the D70. You've got clipping in the highlights and the shadows. The D700, you have only clipping in the highlights, but no clipping in the shadows. Bring up the blacks and bring down the whites to level it out like we've seen. And we see that the shadow detail is fine. There's no clipping in the shadows, but there's still clipping in the highlights in both the D70 and the D700. But the D700 is slightly better than the D70, okay? Let's go back to the JPEG and we notice that both images look fine. In fact, the D70 almost looks better than the D700. The D70's slightly higher exposure makes this particular image a little bit better than the D700. Okay, moving on to the next image. Okay, this image of the blue bottle in the window. This is the window on the other side of the building so that the sun is not coming in this window. Okay, though this is not quite as high of a dynamic range image. Let's take a look. Open the unedited raw image, set it to black and white, and we see the D70 has some clipping in the dark areas. Bring up the blacks and you'll see both images are, the clipping has gone away. So the shadow detail was there in the D70, we just had to find it. Okay, but again, let's go back to the original JPEG and you'll see both images look fine. Okay, so if you're gonna buy a camera, a D70 or a 700, if you're tired of your phone's AI looking photographs on your phone and you want a traditional camera look, a D700 is a very good idea, but the D70 is very affordable. And in fact, this guy, he did a review of the D70. It's a very detailed review. It took him a year to do it, to put it together. Anyway, you can click here and you can watch that guy's video. I highly recommend it. I can also put the link below, not a problem. I already did a color comparison and you can see that when I click right here, you can check that out. The D70 and the D700 both produce very usable, similar and usable images in the end, okay? So thanks for watching and please click the like and subscribe button to help support this channel.